Hey everybody, I'm Andy Smith. I'm a 30-year comic book veteran, having worked for Marvel Comics, DC Comics, Image Comics, Cross Generation, Ominous Press. You name it, I've probably worked for them. And I do other things art-wise outside of comics in the field of advertising. I've also written some books on drawing comics you might have seen. Drawing American manga superheroes, Drawing Dynamic Comics was my first book. And I also did the handy little How to Draw Superhero sketchbook where all you need is a pencil because you do all the work right inside the book. Enough about that. This is the Book Look series. The Book Look series is where I grab a book off my library. You can see the tons of books I have behind me. And I go through it page by page with you so you can see if it's a book that you might want to buy. I like to know what I want to buy before I buy it, and I feel this is a way to give you some insight into these books. So join me for today's book look. Thanks.
Well, heidi-ho, everybody. This is Andy Smith, your host with the most, doing another book look. This one is a throwback to my childhood. I remember when this comic came out. This is just a comic book, not a big fat instructional book. Hell, I don't even know if it's 32 pages, but when I saw this as an aspiring wannabe comic book artist in my teens, I was like, I've got to get it. John Byrne, 1985, has work in here as well as tongue-tied, some other artists. Love this cover. This book isn't going to go super in-depth, but it's just a cool collectible. But there were tips I did gain from it as a youth. It's amazing to think about when John did this, he was 35. You know, when I bought this, 35-year-old was like, "Ooh, that guy's old." But yeah, not really. So anyhow, let's take a look at the How to Draw Comics comic. It was produced by Solson. I think I pronounced that right. Yep, Solson Publications. It did come out in 1985, and art by John Byrne and John Romita Sr. So right there, it's hard to get any better at the time. This is a John Byrne drawing. You know, when I was a kid seeing this, obviously I knew it was a sketch, but it was harder for me to understand in regards to breakdowns, building blocks, of putting a figure together and stuff like that. Now, however, and in the past, of course, I can look at it and really see what John was doing here with quick initial figure construction. So it starts off like any good book does, telling you about some tools of the trade, mechanical pencils. I want to say these are all from photographs that were basically photocopy, of a photograph of the tool and then a photocopy of the photograph to get it to look like this. But I have a mechanical pencil just like that. I use a .05. I have regular pencils, don't use those a lot. And I also have lead holders where you put a piece of lead into the holder and you have a specific sharpener to sharpen the lead. I actually use a lead holder for my initial rough, and I don't really sharpen the pencil. It's pretty blunt because I'm not looking for tight details when I start roughing in the drawing. I want that big blunt pencil lead, and then I'll tighten up with a .05 for details and stuff. Of course, I still use a kneaded eraser for wiping stuff out because it's moldable, so you can get really little details, or you can just flatten it out to get big areas. That looks just like my pencil sharpener. And yeah, I used to have T-squares and triangles. I still have triangles. I don't really use a T-square much for anything. So, of course, paper is always important. Most professionals use Bristol board, paper 2-ply Bristol board. Smooth or vellum surface is up to the artist. Vellum has texture to it. And I like it. A nice drawing of a drafting table, which I'm looking at mine. That kind of looks just like my drafting table. So, and in chapter 2, a little bit on drawing the figure. This drawing here is from John Byrne's sketchbook. It looks like 1978 he did this. So 28-year-old John Byrne. Cool drawing of Wolverine there, looking ferocious and feral. This is where we get into the John Romita artwork. Very classic. I love, love, love John Romita's artwork. Heroic proportions. Look at this guy. He's 9 heads tall. 9, but you look at this and you don't go, look at that tiny little head. It's how he breaks up the proportions from the top of the head to basically his crotch is 4 heads. It's basically from the crotch down that the 5 heads come into play. His thighs 2, right? And then from the bottom of his thigh, top of the knee to 3/4 of the way down his calf or whatever is 2 heads, and then another whole head. So that's where the proportions really come into play to lengthen the figure. Same with the women. So I remember looking specifically, Carrie Gamble comes to mind. So does Mike Zeck actually too, that has this proportion in the legs. Same with the women. The women from top of the head to the crotch is only 4, but then everything else, the upper leg is about right, but then the lower legs are elongated to give that taller feel. Because if you look at, I love this, realistic proportions, 8 heads. Real people aren't eight heads tall. I mean, if you took, just like, say, me standing like this and then measured my head and broke it down, I'd be like 6.5. But this just feels right. And look at the differences. 4 heads down to the crotch, kind of like here, right? And then 4 heads from crotch to bottom of foot. Now, the funny thing is, when I was taught in art school, drawing heroic proportions, I was taught 8 heads high, because 8 is easy to divide up when you're drawing a figure on a page. Halfway is the crotch, and then the legs are the other half, bottom half, torso and waist, top half. And you can see the difference is here, the 6th head comes down at the top of the knee, right? Here, it's at the bottom of the knee. And then from the bottom of the knee to the foot, bottom of the foot is 2 heads, whereas here, top of the knee, 2 heads goes calf, and then, like 3/4 down of the lower leg, and then the last head is from that 3/4 mark to the bottom of the foot. So this is actually how I was taught to break up a figure. And this would work as a heroic figure. It's just this guy, the width of his shoulders and stuff like that doesn't look heroic. But if you went in and widened his shoulders and stuff and made his body mass bigger, that would be a heroic figure. So it's kind of interesting, but I do love that a lot, the 9 head. Then we get back to John Byrne. John Byrne talking about stick figures here, which is from How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. It's a good way to start with a line of action. But what I really like is just seeing some of this little under construction sketching he did. I mean, these weren't, the thing is, these were just pulled from like John Byrne's sketchbooks. They weren't really John sitting down going, oh, I got to teach somebody how to draw a figure. You can see his proportion and structure there. This is obviously the Incredible Hulk arm and stuff right here. This is John Byrne as well, showing construction of a figure. This is probably one of the best ones right here that I picked up from this book, even as a kid, was, it's a nice hourglass shape for the female figure, but just seeing the nice flow. Now we get back to John Romita Sr., and you can just see some of his basic figure construction. You know, I wish there was a little more to it, but, you know, this is really just skimming the surface of teaching figure drawing and stuff. Once again, back to John Byrne. You know, these write-ups are nice that he's doing. I'm not sure they really correlate well with the drawings that he actually did. I have a feeling these were written not by John Byrne, but by somebody else going off of these drawings that John showed. Obviously, this is The Thing. Then we're back to John Romita Sr. talking about posing. You know, nobody really sits in a chair like that. A lot of people don't really sit that comfortably either, but still, this has more life to it than that does. And this is back to John Byrne here with these female figures. This is cool, just talking about different body shapes and stuff. Once again, this is just from his sketchbook. It's the Blob. Incredible Hulk. I can't remember who that was, but I've seen all these drawings before. And even when I bought this, I already owned The Art of John Byrne, who I believe was put out, that book was put out from the same company that did this. And I've seen almost all these drawings. This, however, this was very informative because you see this finished sketch, but here, as basic as it is, you can see how he starts it. And, you know, looking back on this is really kind of how I start doing figures now as well. And like that. And then even down here with these little quick gestures. Here is John Romita Sr. again, doing some great classical drawing. You can see this, he's working those 9-head high proportions with the legs and stuff. But these are great. The motion in these figures, the nice twist of the body and such. Just really, really nice. Same with these female figures. This is back to John Byrne. This is pretty informative right here of seeing how to structure a female figure. Then we get into some storytelling. It's not a deep dive. These are thumbnails, and these are about the size of my thumbnail sketches. And my thumbnails are pretty much probably this readable as well in regards to being able to tell what is going on. But it's good to do these thumbnails so you can block out compositions and such in each panel before you get to the larger page. Because if the page is readable at this size, it'll definitely work full size. I always thought this was fun, showing figures, cropping and such, and what works and doesn't. I mean, yeah, this is very off balance, doesn't really work. This one is cropped at the knee, so that doesn't work. But here's the thing, if you put motion lines streaking behind this guy, I mean, this would work as a figure flying off panel. This one obviously doesn't work because, yes, the building tangent right up to his waist looks like he's planted on it, plus he's centered in the panel. If this figure was scooched over a little bit so he wasn't centered, drop this down so it's not touching him, you know, that would work fine. This one, you know, they're saying you shouldn't do this because it kind of looks like he's a giant compared to her. And part of that's because he's in the same, his legs are kind of in the same perspective as the grid below. So, you know, you could offset it some, you know, the legs, tilt the figure a little bit. But I mean, honestly, I can see as a sketch at this stage why it doesn't work. But if this was fully drawn out with her standing on the top of a building or a street, and with proper overlapping of the stuff behind him, this would work fine. You know he's in the air and he's not a giant. I mean, you could drop a shadow down from him. That's not a big deal. This, of course, this is bad cropping. You don't crop at joints. So you don't crop at a wrist, an elbow, a shoulder, a knee, a waist, a neck, you know, etc. So yeah, that's bad cropping. This one, when I say the camera, I mean the point of view. I'm trying to see what he's saying about this. And so through his fingers while trying to get back from the in the first panel, the lovely Oh, so this is talking about this. What? I don't know. I don't have a problem with this. I've drawn something like that before. Two guys shaking hands. Long shot of the earth. It could be because it's centered. So, you know, when I do something like this, you take into account word balloons. So you pull this down a little bit so the balloons can be up here. You could offset that. But this I totally get. She's on the left. He's on the right. And in the next panel, she's now looking over to this side. So he magically is off camera over to this side of her now. So it doesn't work. So if this panel was flipped, it would work just fine. So I totally understand that. This is talking about tilting the camera, gives it a little more dramatics and such. So, you know, give it a little tilt. Now, I read somewhere, and I cannot remember for the life of me where I read it, that a more dramatic camera tilt is actually this way, rotating to the right, not to the left. To the right is more dramatic, and to the left is more offsetting. Like it's unsettling when you tilt that way. Here, this dude's running across town, but the problem is in American comics and over here, we learn to read left to right. So your eye, if this was flipped, would travel this way, and you'd really get the feeling of him running, because your eye would come into panel here and go this way, and you'd feel like he ran across the page, whereas this way you don't. So that's why you want to move left to right. Here he's just showing a basic mistake I've seen people make. Evildoer opens the door. That's fine for this panel. And then you cut to this panel, and now the door is opening the other way. So you just need to be consistent. So that totally makes sense. As standalone panels, that's a fine standalone panel, and that is too. But together they don't work. This one cracks me up because Byrne does this all the time. You don't use the panel borders as real objects. You know, they're not there technically. But so he's saying you shouldn't put people's feet on the bottom of the panel and use the side of the panel as something either. Now, Byrne doesn't usually draw people leaning on the panel border, the vertical, but on the horizontal, I've seen many artists, including myself, doing an eye level where the bottom panel border is like the eye level and people's feet and everything touch it. So that I don't have a big problem with. Here we have John Romita Sr. again talking about characters interacting with each other in the panels. You know, these are all great examples here of nice panel layouts and such. This one I still use to this day, which is before you draw anything in the panel, figure out what your eye level is and draw a grid. And once you have your grid drawn, your perspective grid drawn, sketch in the stuff, and it really helps keep things grounded. Even doing shots that are outside where the ground isn't perfectly even, it'll still help you keep things grounded, and then you can adjust appropriately if it is an outside shot where the ground isn't even. We got here faces, heads. I mean, this doesn't really tell you anything about proportion. There's no steps on drawing a head. Once again, these are just pulled from John Byrne's sketchbook, showing just sketches, and then the writer's trying to make sense of the drawings that were pulled. But it's cool to look at, you know, from a study standpoint. The different types of head, different head shapes, characteristics, and such. So love that real cartoony looking guy there. That's great. Let's see, technology in comics. I mean, is that really a chapter? It could just be called backgrounds. This tech, if you've ever heard of a artist named Sid Mead. Sid Mead did Blade Runner designs and such. John Byrne gets a lot of his tech from Sid Mead. Just Google Sid Mead and images, and you'll go, holy crap, now I know where John Byrne learned to draw tech from. I love this stuff. I had no idea who Sid Mead was growing up. So I just saw this and was like, John Byrne's a genius. And then I discovered Sid Mead in art school and was like, oh, light bulb went off. But I do get a lot of my tech from like Sid Mead and John Byrne. So even stuff like that, spacesuits and such. And then we get to the end. And once again, that's very Sid Mead as well. All this stuff is. And it says, next issue, pens, inks, and some techniques on what the heck to do with them, as well as chapters on the face, more on the figure, and storytelling. Unfortunately, there was never a second issue. It was the one and done. John Byrne sketchbook. That is not what the cover looks like. I actually did a book look on it. You can go back through my videos and see it. But that's it. That is today's quick book look, How to Draw Comics comic. It's a great little collectible to have if you can find it, whether you want to be an artist or not. I just think it's cool to have in your collection. I think I have more than one of these. This one's still in pretty nice shape. I do keep it in a bag and board because I'm a geek like that. Guys, thank you for joining me on this book look. I will catch you guys later. Remember to like the video, subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of these great book looks. And of course, check out Kor-Drath.com, my 76-page graphic novel, Barbarian Badassery. Kor-Drath's tribe is taken out by Legion of the Undead, and now he has to find out why. Why was his tribe targeted the way it was? Him and the sorceress Adriana go on this quest to find out what the hell is going on. It's Game of Thrones, Dungeons and Dragons, Conan, all mixed up into one. All right, guys, I'll catch you next time. Take care, and see you guys later. Bye-bye, everybody.
Retribution! Oh yeah, we want retribution!